rest, rise, enjoy fun, and welcome available to you. Good afternoon.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. How are you doing? So welcome to part 2 of our exploration on an inspiration to give rise to Bodhi mind. This is a continuation of last night's lecture. So before we begin, could I just see a show of hands? Who has come to the lecture last night? Okay, so that's about half, which is much better than anticipated because one of our Dharma sisters told us that only 2 were repeats. Okay, so before we begin, first of all, I would like to mention that this text is a translation of 劝发菩提心文, which has been translated by Hobangshan International Translation Center. It's available for free on PDF format, so you can download it by scanning the QR code. And during this talk, we will be reading excerpts from this particular text. We won't be able to read everything, but there are important points which you can follow and read along on your phone. If you do not have access to it, don't worry, because on the PowerPoint, I will also have the words for you to follow along. Okay, so the text is called An Inspiration to Give Rise to the Bodhi Mind. And last night we discussed that the Bodhi mind is essential to our cultivation. And it's not something that arises spontaneously. It's not something that we can rush. It's something that we need to develop gradually and something that we need to nurture. So we also mentioned last night that this particular text is not a sutra. It's a text by an eminent monk, but because it is in accord, it follows the Dharma, so we treat it like a Dharma text. So before we begin any study of the Dharma, please let us first join our palms together, recite the name of Shakyamuni Buddha as well as the opening verse. Namo Shakyamuni Buddha. Namo Shakyamuni Buddha. Namo Shakyamuni Buddha. The unexcelled, most profound, and exquisitely wondrous Dharma is difficult to encounter throughout hundreds of thousands of millions of cosmos. Since we are not able to see, hear, receive, and retain it, may we comprehend the true meaning of the Dharma. So, for this talk, I will be doing a little bit of review from last night, so those of you who weren't here will be able to get a sense of what we talked about. And then we will go into the second half of this Dharma text. So the author of An Inspiration to Give Rise to the Bodhi Mind is Master Xin'an Shixian, who is the 11th patriarch of the Pure Land School. And he wrote this text to encourage his disciples to give rise to the Bodhi mind. So every year, on lunar February 15th, which is the Buddha's parinirvana commemoration day, he would gather all of the monastic and lay disciples to talk about the Pure Land Sutras and also to try and encourage everyone to give rise to the Bodhi mind. So this is why he has written this text. His main audience are the monastics. So oftentimes in reading this particular piece, you will see that he refers a lot to the venerables, to the monastics, about renouncing household life. However, a lot of what he says can be applied to lay practitioners as well, in terms of how we give rise to our Bodhi mind. So no matter whether we are lay practitioners or monastics, our Bodhi mind is the same. It's just our external causes and conditions are a little bit different, and our vows are a little bit different. So in terms of the first part of this text, Master Xing An, he has organized people who cultivate into 8 different types, or people with the intention to cultivate have these 8 different motivations. So the first type we would say is evil, meaning they seem like they are cultivating, but in actuality, they are not. So they just use the package or the image of a cultivator for their own personal gain and benefit. So that's why we call it an evil type of vow, or evil mindset. And the second one would be a right mindset, which means that they are really truly cultivating for the sake of practicing, not for fame, not for fortune, not for pleasure. Next, he talks about true vow and false vow. What is the difference between something that's true and something that's false? So people who have a false vow often give up halfway because they did not truly want it. It may be that it's just something that occurred to them that was convenient, so they do it. But when they meet obstacles, they tend to give up, which means that it was not a true vow. For example, when people get married, how come some people end up getting divorced maybe a year later? So it means that vow was not true, that when they encounter obstacles, they will give up. So Master Xing An Zixian is telling us that when we cultivate, we want to make sure that our intentions are true. So whenever we meet an obstacle, we will keep persevering. Then the next pair of vows that he talks about is great versus small. So a small vow is not necessarily a bad vow. It's just saying that it's for one personal benefit. He does not think about others. And so what we want to do as a Buddhist practitioner is we want to develop our compassion so that we expand our mindset from being very self-focused to all sentient beings. And then lastly, he talks about the difference between a partial and perfect Bodhi vow. And the perfect Bodhi vow would be that of a Buddha. So before we attain Buddhahood, all of us are partial vows. Because even though we want to reach for Buddhahood, even though we want to liberate sentient beings, along the way we still have many attachments. So that's why it's still partial. It's not completely perfect. So now that we know about this type of 8 vows, Master Xing An Zixian is telling us we need to constantly examine our minds. We need to constantly reflect on what is our intention for cultivating. And then when we reflect, how do we develop our vow towards what is wholesome and away from what is unwholesome? So, on page 21 of An Inspiration to Give Rise to the Bodhi Mind, he talks about 10 different conditions. So the Bodhi mind is not something that just spontaneously pops up. It has different conditions, just like when you get angry, you don't get angry for no reason. There's always something that happens, either internally or externally, that gives rise to this emotion. So likewise, for us to develop this Bodhi mind, there's also something that needs to occur either externally or internally for us to give rise to this Bodhi mind. So this is important to say that even though we all have the Buddha nature, we need to develop the causes and condition to make sure that our Buddha nature is able to come into fruition. So what are these 10 conditions? Okay. So the first 5, we can categorize it as being mindful of external conditions. So for us to cultivate, we not only need the wish to cultivate, but we also need people to support us along the way. We also need conditions from other sentient beings, from other people to help us. And so the first 5 would be mindful of the kindness of first, the Buddha, second, parents, third, teachers, the 4th, benefactors, and 5, sentient beings. So in order for us to give rise to the Bodhi mind, or give rise to Anuttara Samyak Sambodhi, the first 5 aspects is that we need to be mindful that we are receiving so much kindness from these 5 categories of people. Okay, so the first one is the Buddha. So let us read a little bit of excerpt from that. If you go to page 'Alright, so I don't have it on my PowerPoint, but I will just summarize it. So the Buddha, as you know, he also practiced for many kalpas before he attained enlightenment. And when he attained enlightenment, what he discovered was so profound. And when he began to teach, no one understood what he was saying. So at first he said, okay, maybe this is too profound. Is there any point in saying this because sentient beings might not be able to understand? And so at this time, the heavenly beings, or Dharma, comes down to persuade the Buddha to teach, to be compassionate towards all sentient beings. And so the Buddha tried to find many different skillful means to teach the Dharma in a way that sentient beings understand. And as you can see from his past life, when he made the Bodhi mind, he sacrificed his life, he sacrificed his wealth, he sacrificed his family multiple times in order to actualize his practice of Bodhisattva. However, even after he attained Buddhahood, there are still people who slander him, who still do not believe in the Buddha's teachings. Now this is quite unfortunate, but the Buddha never gave up. The Buddha still believes in spreading the Dharma. He's still very compassionate. And so today, being able to be at a temple like this, we need to be mindful that this was only possible because of the Buddha's compassion. So without the Buddha, there would be no temple. Without the Buddha, there would not be Venerable Master Xing Yun. Without the Buddha, a lot of sentient beings would still be clouded in ignorance. Perhaps you have benefited from the Dharma or the Buddha's teachings. So we also need to be mindful that the Buddha was sharing his enlightenment with all of us. And so if we can be aware of this, then it's one of the conditions that helps us develop our Bodhi mind. It helps us not take it for granted. It helps us be able to find that determination to really cultivate. So the next one is to be mindful of the kindness of our parents. So even if you are not a Buddhist, you still have a parent. So whether you believe in the mindfulness of the kindness of the Buddha, everyone should be able to relate to the next one, which is the kindness of our parents. And by saying parents, we not only mention like our birth parents, but our family that has raised us, no matter what your definition of family is. Okay? So on page 29, Master Xing An Sixian says, our compassionate parents have indeed suffered to labor hard for our care, carrying us to term for 10 lunar months and through 3 years of nursing and endless diaper changes to bring us up. They swallow the bitter and give us sweetness. So what this means is that through the process of raising a child, a parent needs to make multiple sacrifices. So I'm sure all of you as parents can also understand the hard work and effort that you put in to make sure that your children are happy, they're healthy, and they're well educated. So what happens after we grow up, we become adults? Now, of course, from the perspective of this particular text, Master Xing An Sixian is saying to the monastics that we have left the household life, we have left our family, so we can no longer take care of our parents. But if we look at this very closely, this can also apply to us in modern society as well. So if you look a little bit further down on page 29, he says, we can provide for our parents no more, nor can we revere our ancestors properly. We can neither support them, nor can we liberate them. From a worldly view, we have caused great loss. From the view of the supramundane, we have little to contribute. As a failure both ways, our heavy wrongdoings are not easy to get rid of. So, even if we are not monastics, as lay practitioners, oftentimes when we age and we start our own families, we don't necessarily live with our parents. So maybe our parents are in senior homes, or maybe they're living by themselves. And so we also need to work. We also need to get a job to make money. And so we aren't able to care for our parents to the best of our abilities. And likewise, when our parents pass away, we aren't able to go with them. So no matter what kind of care we give to our parents, it's not sufficient. It's not long term. So in terms of worldly, so from a worldly view here, meaning care as in making sure that they're healthy, making sure that they are well fed, making sure that they have someone to talk to. So even in this perspective, from a worldly perspective, we haven't done enough to really repay the kindness of our parents. Now from the next perspective, the supramundanes, meaning from the perspective of the Buddha Dharma, or the perspective of liberation, we haven't really done enough to share the Dharma with our parents, to make sure that they are happy and free from suffering. So in this essence, if we're mindful of how much kindness our parents have shown us and how little we have done, then we realize that we really need to work hard in our cultivation. And additionally, we also are more able to give rise to the mind to be compassionate towards other people. So if you think about it, if our parents raised us with so much effort, and we only work for our own benefit, we only get a job to make money for ourselves, and maybe we don't use our life very meaningfully, then all of the sacrifices of our parents go to waste. Now, however, if we make sure that what we do with our life contributes to society, helps other people, then the sacrifices of our parents become more meaningful, that it becomes worth it. So one way for us to give rise to the Bodhi mind is to be mindful of the kindness of our parents. Okay? Then the next one, number 3, is to be mindful of the kindness of our teachers. So on page 33 it says, although our parents give us life, we would not know morals and manners if there were no teachers of worldly knowledge. And we would not understand the Dharma if there were no teachers of Buddhism. So what we mean by teachers, there are 2 types. One would be your worldly teacher, for example, when we go to primary school, secondary school, all of these teachers who teach us the skills like how to read, mathematics, also your friends who teach you how to be a good person, they would be considered your teachers of worldly knowledge. But in addition to that, we also have Dharma teachers, like the Venerables here, and also Venerable Master Xing Yun. And so we wouldn't be able to understand the Dharma without the teachers. Because if you don't know how to read, if you don't know how to socialize and interact, then you wouldn't be able to survive in society for you to listen to the Dharma. And without Dharma teachers, there would be no Dharma for you to hear. And so we have to think about how much kindness these teachers have given us. You might think, oh, but teachers, isn't that their profession? Don't they just teach as part of their work? But if we think about it, that a lot of times, at least in the US, teachers are very underpaid. And they have to be with so many children all this time. It's quite stressful. So, additionally, we also need to understand how much effort the Dharma teachers have put in. For example, Venerable Master Xing Yun. For him to propagate the Dharma in Singapore, he has to first go through a lot of obstacles. First, when he arrived in Taiwan, he met a lot of difficulties. And it's only because of his vow to propagate Buddhism internationally that Ho Guangshan started building branch temples overseas. And that's how Ho Guangshan Singapore was able to be established. So without Venerable Master Xing Yun's vow, perhaps the Dharma would still be very limited to a certain geographic region. And additionally, I'm sure those of you who are based in Singapore also know of Venerable Manke and also Venerable Jueten. So in the early days of building this temple, it was not easy. You had a lot of effort to be put in. So if we're mindful of this, we know to cherish our beautiful temple. We know to cherish all of the Dharma that we're able to hear. So by being mindful of this, is one of the ways to give rise to the Bodhi mind. Okay? So he continues on to say, without knowing morals and manners, are we not just like animals? Without understanding the Dharma, are we not just like an ordinary person? So these questions are for us to reflect about how we are recipients of others' kindness. And oftentimes we don't think about it because the mind tends to focus on the self. The mind likes to attach to the me. But we don't think about what other people have done and the sacrifices of others. So if we are mindful of other people, then we can develop the Bodhi mind. Okay. The next one is to be mindful of the kindness of benefactors. Benefactors means people who donate to the temple. But from a lay person's perspective, it can mean anyone who has contributed to our life. anyone who has helped us along the way. It doesn't necessarily mean to give us money. So why should we be mindful of our benefactors' deep kindness? For what I enjoy and consume are not only dependent on my strength, 2 meals per day, clothes for the 4 seasons, medicine in time of sickness. So it means that when we eat the food, it's not just because we earn a lot of money and so we get to eat, but it comes from the efforts of the farmers, people to import food into Singapore and to cook the food. So it doesn't mean just because we have money, we are entitled to everything. If we have the money but there are no farmers, unfortunately we would still need to go out into the fields and plant our own food. So it's to be mindful. And also the clothes that we wear. You can think about all of the people in the factories who manufacture these clothes, and maybe they are being paid very low wages. So why is it that we have these things and they do not? So by being mindful of this and how much kindness these people have shown us indirectly, we can give rise to Bodhi mind. And he continues to go on. So, and whatever helps sustain the mouth and body, all of these daily necessities come from the kindness of others' effort. They work very hard and still barely scrape by. Yet I am sitting here to consume a meal and do not feel content. Meaning they work very hard to plant the food. They work very hard to make these clothes. And yet when I go shopping, or maybe when I eat, I'm still very picky. And maybe I have a mind of discrimination and say, I don't like this, I don't like this. And yet, if we put ourselves in other people's shoes, we know how much effort that they have put in. So what we see is not just food, not just clothes, but the kindness of other people. Okay? So he goes on. They work hard to barely cover their bodies, while I am here secure and comfortable. Have I yet learned to appreciate this? They live in humble cottages, busy and distressed their entire lives, while we live in grand buildings and spend our lives leisurely. They labor for our enjoyment. How can our minds be peaceful? They harvest for our consumption. Is this fair? So I feel that this is quite applicable to any person who is living in this world. Because of dependent origination, we depend on other people's efforts to be here. So it doesn't just apply to monastics. So if we're mindful of this, then we try to be compassionate. We also wish these people to be happy and free from suffering. And the only way to do that is to really cultivate, to understand the Dharma so that we can also share it with other people. Okay. Then the last of the external conditions that we should be mindful of is the kindness of sentient beings. And then he goes on to say, why should we be mindful of sentient beings' deep kindness? For countless kalpas, we and all sentient beings have been related as parents and children life after life. So we should have gratitude for one another. The confusion of not recognizing each other is caused by rebirth. If we contemplate this deeply, how can we not repay them? The one with fur and horns could be our parents from before, meaning fur and horns meaning animals, could be our parents from before, and the one crawling or flying could be our father. When a child separates from his parents at childhood, he cannot recognize his parents as an adult. It must only be more so through the separation of rebirths. So what this is trying to say is, from the Buddhist perspective of rebirth, we not only just have parents of this lifetime, but parents of many, many different lifetimes. And why aren't we able to remember our parents from these past lifetimes? So Master Xing'an Sixian is saying that a child who is separated at birth from their parents, when they grow up, they might not recognize them. So likewise, when we are reborn in this world, when we see our parents from the past lives, we might not be able to recognize them either. But just do realize that we are somehow all interconnected with one another. And even if you do not believe in rebirth, if you think of it from a scientific standpoint, many of us share the same DNA. So in that sense, we are all one big family. So if we're mindful of this, then we can generate the Bodhi mind. Okay? So to recap, the mindfulness of external conditions means to be aware of the kindness of the Buddha, parents, teachers, benefactors, and sentient beings. So when we say making the great Bodhi vow, what do we mean? It means a move away from self-benefit into the benefit of others. So on this particular slide, you see pictures of two different vehicles. So this is what we mean by a small mind or a small vow versus a great vow. So if you look at this, what do you see is the difference? No one is driving the car, you can drive the car. All right, so when you go out, let's say in Singapore, let's say you are the driver, which would you drive? Most of us would drive the smaller vehicle, right? Why? Because we are the only person that needs to get somewhere. We are only driving for ourselves. So that's why we choose the smaller vehicle. However, if today you are a bus driver and your intention is you need to get all of these Singaporeans to their destination, which would you drive? You would drive a big bus. So likewise, the difference between an arhat and a bodhisattva is their wish to benefit for all beings, their compassion. So if today you know that you want to take lots of friends with you, lots of family members to go with you to the other shore, you wouldn't take the small vehicle, you would take a very big vehicle. Even though it might be a little bit harder to drive, you might need an extra license or two, but in the long run, more people benefit. Right? So the difference between the two is really ultimately compassion. Compassion for other people. And how do we develop it? Is by being mindful of how much kindness other people have given us. So this helps us expand our mindset. Now, the next 5 conditions to develop the Bodhi mind are internal conditions. So in the previous one, we were talking about 5 external conditions. Right? Our parents, our benefactors, our teachers. Now we're talking about internal conditions, things within our mind, within our hearts. The first is to be mindful of the suffering of life and death. And then we have respect for one's own spiritual being, repent karmic hindrances, aspire toward rebirth in Pure Land, and preserve the right Dharma. So what do we mean by being mindful of the suffering of life and death? Let's read a little bit together. On page 43. Why should we be mindful of the suffering of life and death? For endless kalpas, we and all sentient beings have been trapped in the cycle of birth and death and have not been liberated. We have been born in heaven and on earth, here and there, 10,000 times, ascending and falling in an instant. One moment we are in heaven, the next we are on earth. Then follows the fall to hell as an animal or a hungry ghost. We leave the gate of darkness at dawn and return at dusk. The moment we are released from an iron jail, we return immediately. Hot iron can relieve no hunger. Swallowing it burns the stomach, liver, and intestines. Boiling copper can quench no thirst. Drinking it chars the flesh and blood. We may be sawed in half, but the body comes back together again. So this is very descriptive. And the chapter or the section on being mindful of the suffering of life and death is the longest section in the inspiration to give rise to the Bodhi mind. And here, Master Xing'an Siqian is talking about all of the different realms that we are continuously being reborn into. What is really interesting is that his description of hell, meaning that even if we suffer, the body still comes back again. So this might seem very difficult to imagine in terms of where we have been in the six realms, but we can also look at it from a psychological perspective. So from a psychological perspective, scientists have classified human emotions into 6 basic types. And very interestingly, these 6 basic types of emotions can correlate with the 6 realms in Buddhism. So each of these emotions has a specific characteristics that matches the 6 realms. So, for example, let's start with the heavenly realm. When do you feel like you're in a heavenly realm? When you're so joyful, when you're so blissful, when you're so relaxed and peaceful. So as you can see in this green section, is happiness, right? So happiness, you may see very satisfied, overjoyed, excited, thrilled. So all of these secondary emotions are built on happiness, which is the hallmark of the heavenly realm. Now, in terms of the Asuras are also heavenly beings, but oftentimes they fight. It's not because that they have done anything in particularly incorrect. It's just when they see something that's not to their liking, they get very angry, or they see other people not obeying the law, they get very angry about it. So we can say that this correlates with disgust. They often cannot bear to stand to see each other's flaws, so disdain, disbelief, distaste. And we can say that this type of emotion is in the Ashura realm. Now, as for the human realm, we would say that we are calm, content, and we have motivation, right? The animal realm would correlate to this yellow section. Afraid, surprised, confused. So we see animals, oftentimes when they see or hear a noise, they become very startled and they run away. And a lot of times, animals fear for their life. And oftentimes they're confused. And what they work for is for food, for sleep. So there's not much cognition going on in terms of wishing for the Bodhi mind, wishing to cultivate. So we can say that when our own emotions, when we feel fear, when we feel confused, then this can also be said that our mind is being reborn in the animal realm. As for the hungry ghost, its characteristic would be sadness or a depression, disappointment, hurt. So hungry ghosts, they feel hungry because no matter what they get, it can never fill up the hole inside them, never fill up the stomach. So they always feel this need. So sometimes we also feel very needy, and sometimes when we are in the depths of despair, we can feel that we don't find any joy in anything. No matter what we do, no matter what we eat, no matter what we think, we still find that we feel very empty. So this is a characteristic of the hungry ghost realm. Then the last one is very easy to be able to see is hell. Hell, the fires of anger. So in the red section, when we're cranky, aggravated, upset, frustrated, irritated, these are all characteristics of hell. It means that we feel very agitated, we feel very hot-tempered. So as you can see in a day, we constantly experience all these different types of emotion to a certain degree. So it can be said that in everyday life, we are constantly being reborn in the 6 realms, and we don't find any peace. And when Master Xing An describes that when we suffer in hell, the body still comes together. Then what happens? You go back in again. So likewise, when we experience anger, after we become not angry again, then something provokes us, then we become angry again. So it means, the body comes together. Okay, so maybe you see your children throwing a tantrum, you become angry, but then after a while, this anger stops. So the body comes together, the mind comes together again. But then the next thing happens, and then you jump back in. So all of these imagery can be a metaphor for our mind, that we are easily led by our outside surroundings, and we suffer because of this. So there is a story. Once there was a wise man who held a seminar to teach young people the meaning of life and how to get rid of suffering and sorrow in their life. So many people wanted to hear what this wise man had to say and came to the seminar. So when he began, he told a joke, and everyone in the room laughed. Ha 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 ha. Then 5 minutes later, he told the same joke again. This time, only about half of the people laughed at his joke. And then, 5 minutes later, he told the joke for a 3rd time, and no one in the room laughed. And so the wise man said, "You see, you cannot laugh at a joke for more than a few times. So why do you keep crying over the same thing when you meet something sorrowful?" So this is something that we can ponder. A lot of times we feel a lot of suffering because we cannot manage to detach ourselves. We cannot manage to let go of it. However, for happy things, like a joke, or happy memories, by revisiting it, it doesn't bring us much more happiness. So by understanding this characteristic of the human mind, we can understand what it means when we say suffering of life and death. And the Buddha, he taught the Four Noble Truths as his first sermon. He says that there is suffering. And when we mean suffering, it doesn't mean physical pain. It can mean mental dissatisfaction. That no matter how great something is, you can always think of a way how to improve it. So for example, for those of you who are married, maybe you say, "Oh yes, I love my spouse." Those of you who have children, "I love my children." But we as Asian parents, we always say, "Oh, if our children was a little bit smarter, or maybe if they were more diligent, then they would be the perfect child." And as a spouse, maybe you would say, "Okay, maybe if they changed the way that they handle the bills, then you would be the perfect spouse. So even though we love them, there's still something that we could change about them. And even if they change that thing, you would think, oh, next we need another thing to be changed. So in every single situation, we will find the negative. And that causes us suffering. It doesn't mean that we suffer mental pain. It just means we're never 100% satisfied. So in terms of suffering, there's also impermanence. Things that make us very happy can also become our greatest sorrow. So recently, one of our devotees' family member passed away. And family can be the source of one's greatest happiness, but when impermanence strikes and someone passes away, it can also bring us the greatest sorrow. And this is a fact of life, says the Buddha. However, how do we meet with such suffering? How do we eradicate it? A lot of the suffering comes from the external environment, but how do we maintain a peace of mind within ourselves? So the Buddha taught the Eightfold Path for us to understand and realize the way that the world functions. So here is a comic. So the first one, the patient says, I do feel poorly. I hope everything is going to be okay. So this is what the Buddha means by saying that there is suffering. Mental suffering can be likened to an illness, but we need to find out what is the cause of our dissatisfaction. So the doctor says, now let us find out what the cause is. When we understand what is the cause of our illness, then we can have a cure. So this is the third of the Four Noble Truths. There is cessation of suffering. You can stop it. You can become healthy again. You say that there is a cure. And the doctor says, yes, if you take the medicine, meaning this is representative of the fourth noble truth, the prescription, the way to end suffering. So the Buddha says, as long as we cultivate, we can alleviate our own dissatisfaction, alleviate our own suffering in this world. And so Master Xing An Sixian also talks about how we can cultivate to get rid of our suffering, to relieve ourselves of suffering, and to gain happiness for ourselves and other people. So that's why the sixth and also the first of the internal conditions is to be mindful of such suffering. If we don't feel that we are suffering, then there's no motivation for us to keep going on and cultivating. So the next one is respect for our own spiritual being. And so on page 57, let us read together. What is having respect for our own spiritual being? We have the same essence of mind as Shakyamuni Buddha. Why has the Buddha attained supreme perfect enlightenment for immeasurable cause, while we remain ignorant and confused as ordinary people? The Buddha has immeasurable supernatural powers and wisdom and adornments of merits and virtues, while we have immeasurable karma and affliction, and are strangled by life and death. While reflecting on this, do we not feel embarrassed? It is like a priceless gem discarded in a mud puddle, not treasured. Therefore, we should use the immeasurable wholesome teachings to cure our affliction, to cultivate and accumulate virtues and merits. Our nature of virtues will then be revealed. It is as if the priceless gem has been washed and cleaned,
It is then hung high from the ceiling. It sparkles with brilliance, bringing illumination to all.
So from this passage, we see that all of us have the Buddha nature. But what separates us from the Buddha? Our ignorance, our afflictions, which is like the haze in Singapore. It covers everything, and when you have haze and affliction, people around you cough and need to wear a mask, and they want to get away as far as possible. So even though the sky is inherently blue and is very open, we can't see it because of the haze. So even though our inherent Buddha nature is within us, we cannot see it because it's clouded by afflictions. However, we need to realize that we also have the potential within us. As sentient beings, we feel that we are not qualified. We feel that we are not able to become Buddha because it seems so far away. So in the Lotus Sutra, there is a story about two best friends, one who is very poor and one who is very rich. So the poor friend and the rich friend come together for a meeting at the poor friend's house. But the poor friend has a little bit too much to drink and passes out. And so the rich friend thinks to himself, well, how do I help my poor friend? So he takes one of his jewels and puts it into the pocket of this poor friend. But the rich friend has somewhere to go. He cannot wait for his poor friend to wake up from his passing out. So he leaves with the gift already bestowed to the poor friend. Now, upon waking up, the poor friend has no idea that there is a gem in his pocket. And he goes for many years being a beggar. And he works all of these menial jobs and he suffers a lot. And after several years, the two friends meet again. And the rich friend asks him, so what have you done to the gem that I gave you? Did you sell it? Did you benefit from it? And the poor friend is very shocked to realize that all of this time he has been suffering when he could have just used the gem to help himself. So we are the poor friend, and the Buddha is like the rich friend. So all of this time we have the Buddha nature, we have the potential within us, but still we go around and do all of this suffering, and we have no idea. So this is why Venerable Master says during the taking refuge ceremony, to admit and say, I am a Buddha, 我是佛. When we say I am a Buddha, it does not mean we become arrogant and say, oh, I am the Buddha, so you should listen to me. But to realize that inside of us, we also have this potential for enlightenment. We as sentient beings often look down upon ourselves. So that's why you see in children a lot of self-confidence issues. So of course you have people who are very arrogant and narcissists, but you also have people on the other end of the spectrum who feel very depressed and not confident about their own abilities. And when we say abilities in a worldly sense, but also our spiritual capabilities. Sometimes when we see all of this affliction, we see anger, we see our own doubts, we think, okay, maybe we are horrible people. How can I do this? How can I call myself a Buddhist? But Master Xin'an Sishen is saying, don't worry, our nature is the same as the Buddha's. All we need to do is to polish this gem and it will shine very brightly. Okay? So last night I think I gave a metaphor of the mind as a garden. So if we want our garden to grow, what should we do? We cannot just keep pulling the weeds and say, okay, there's a grass that should not grow here, let me pull it out. We cannot just keep spraying insecticide. We cannot just say, okay, we're going to cut everything. What we also need to do is to see the flowers, to give it sunshine, to give it warmth, to give it water. So in our minds, when we see these afflictions, it's not enough just to remove them. That's like pulling the weeds. We also need to realize that within us there is something wholesome. When we see our own compassion, we need to say, hey, good job. Now I need to develop it. Be compassionate towards ourselves. So don't just look at your shortcomings, but also look at the positive aspects within you. However, now that we realize we have this potential, we also need to repent our karmic hindrances, which means to remove our wrongdoings. And so Master Xin'an Sishen says, for what we consume and use, for every thought and action, we break the precepts constantly. For each meal and drink, we violate numerous precepts. In a day, we make countless errors. In a lifetime, our errors must be incalculable. 9 out of 10 people cannot uphold even the 5 precepts. Most of them also hide their offenses instead of honestly repenting. Now, what do we mean by 9 out of 10 people cannot uphold even the 5 precepts? So the 5 precepts in terms of how we interpret them. So Master Xin'an Sishen is taking the more strict interpretation. So if we just say no killing, from a very wide interpretation that we would say, it's just no killing of human life. That's the most basic definition of no killing. But if we were to become a little bit stricter, then you would say no killing of animal life. But even stricter, you would say no killing of time, meaning not to waste your own life. So when you waste time, you're also slowly killing yourself because you're wasting your own life. And also not to waste resources. So oftentimes in our everyday lives, we might not kill people or kill animals, but we waste time, we waste resources. So this is considered, if we were to take it from a strict sense, not upholding the 5 precepts. Which one of the precepts is hardest to uphold? Not lying. Verbal speech is very hard to purify, and it's because not lying also includes not saying hurtful things to other people. But because of our mouth, oftentimes we harm people with our words and not even know it. Or maybe we are prone to gossip, to talk about other people's shortcomings in order for us to feel better about ourselves. So all of these are considered hindrances to our own cultivation. So that's why Master Xin'an Sishen tells us to repent. By repenting, we realize our mistakes and we plant the seed to tell us that we will try not to do this again. However, just because you repent once doesn't necessarily mean that you will definitely succeed, so you need to repent again. Repenting is not saying that, oh, the Buddha needs our repentance, the Buddha needs our apology, but it's a reminder to ourselves that perhaps I need to change this. Perhaps I can improve on this, and it's to be open to bettering ourselves. And so, in terms of repentance, it's just like our children. When we discipline them, if they keep insisting that they did not make a mistake, then the parents will feel very upset because they won't learn and grow from it. However, if they realize the mistake it's okay to have made a mistake as long as we learn and grow from them. Okay. Then the next one is to aspire towards rebirth in the Pure Land. And this is where you can see Master Xing'an Sixian's practice come into play in this text. He's a Pure Land practitioner, and he's saying that the 9th step that we should do to develop our Bodhi mind is to aspire towards rebirth in the Pure Land. And I think last night, one of the participants here in the lecture asked a very good question. Isn't becoming reborn in the Pure Land a type of escape? How is that a Bodhi mind? How does that benefit all sentient beings? And so Master Xing'an Sixian says, why should we aspire to rebirth in the Pure Land? While cultivating in this world, it is very difficult to make progress on the way. In the Pure Land, it is very easy to attain Buddhahood. Because it is so easy, one may attain Buddhahood in one lifetime. Because it is so difficult here, one may not attain it even after many kalpas. Therefore, the sages and saints of the past have all followed this direction. It is discoursed in 10,000 sutras and treatises, and numerous teachings point to this way. It is the most ideal method of cultivation in the age of declining Dharma. Okay, so let's stop here. So why should we aspire to be reborn in the Pure Land? And Master Xing'an Sixian says, because in this world we have many obstacles. There are so many distractions, and there are so many hindrances on our path to cultivation. However, when we go to Pure Land, because of Amitabha's vows, that all sentient beings who are reborn there will attain non-regressing Anuttara Samyak Bodhi, which is the perfect Bodhi mind. So sentient beings there will gain the skills to attain Buddhahood very quickly. And so because of this, many eminent masters promote this practice for us to quickly reach Buddhahood. However, but the sutra also states that little merits and virtues will not cause one to be reborn in the Pure Land. Only abundant merit does. It is said that to increase merits, the best way is to chant the Buddha's name. To increase wholesomeness, the best way is to initiate the Bodhi mind. So in the sutras, says if you wish to be reborn in the Pure Land, you need merits and to give rise to the Bodhi mind. So last night we had a metaphor for the Pure Land. The Pure Land is like a school, a great Buddhist college where sentient beings who are reborn there can learn about the Dharma from Amitabha Buddha and practice there until they have matured their skills to come back and help liberate all sentient beings. So likewise, when you ask someone, why do you go to school? Some people might say, oh, it's because I want to get a good job so I can earn lots of money. But if you ask someone else, another student, they may say, oh, I wish to go to school because I want to learn the skills so when I graduate, I can contribute to society. So what is the difference between the two students? The first student is going to school because of a selfish desire, and the second student is going to school because they want to contribute to society. So likewise, you have two different practitioners who want to go to the Pure Land. One is someone who practices for themselves, they want to escape, they want to enjoy the luxury of Pure Land. And the second one is someone who goes so that they can learn the skills to come back and liberate all sentient beings. So these are the two types of Pure Land practitioners, and Master Xing'an Sixian tells us that we should strive to be the one who aspires to be reborn in the Pure Land because of the Bodhi mind. So he continues. Making the initiation of a great mind is inherent to cultivation. If one is not reborn in the Pure Land, then even with the initiation of a great mind, it is easy to retreat. So he's saying that if you wish to liberate all sentient beings, you should wish to be reborn in the Pure Land. Just like if your child wishes to contribute to society, it's probably best that they go to school to learn the skills. Without going to school, it's very hard to make a contribution to society, even though you really want to, because you don't have the necessary knowledge, you don't have the necessary capabilities. So likewise, even though we want to liberate all sentient beings, it's very hard to do so if we don't equip ourselves first, if we don't go to school first. So that is why we should aspire to be reborn in the Pure Land. And how do we do this? Therefore, one must sow the seed of Bodhi, plow by chanting the Buddha's name, and then the fruit of Buddhahood will naturally increase. So, where is the Pure Land? That's the question. So for some people, the Pure Land is located in Amitabha's Western Pure Land of ultimate bliss. For people like Venerable Master Xing Yun, he says he doesn't want to go to Amitabha's Pure Land. He wants to be reborn on this earth, in this Pure Land in the human world. So he's not planning to be reborn in Amitabha's Pure Land, but coming back to the human world. And why is that? Is his intention for himself or for sentient beings? Sentient beings. However, there are also people who wish to come back to this earth because they say, I would like to enjoy all the beautiful scenery, I would like to enjoy all the luxury, I would like to be with my friends and family. So likewise, there are people who don't necessarily want to go to school. They want to stay in society because they feel that this is where they can be happy and free. But there's another type of practitioner who says, I already have the skills necessary, so I don't think it's necessary for me to go and get another degree and spend all of these years in the school. I can go and contribute to society. And we see that. We see many people who drop out of maybe college and still contribute a lot to society and become very successful. But the difference is the intention. So no matter which Pure Land you want to go, whether it's here in the human world or you want to go to the Western Pure Land, it should be coming from the intention of a Bodhi mind. Right? Now next is the last and final condition to give rise to the Bodhi mind, which is to preserve the right Dharma. And he says, in this age of declining Dharma, his Vijaya have many true followers. There is no distinction between right and deviant, right and wrong. People boast of their cultivation and chase after fame and fortune. So many are like this in the world. Do they know who is the Buddha? What is the Dharma? What is Sangha? Degeneration to such a degree is truly intolerable to mention. Once one thinks of this, one's tears flow unconsciously. So what we mean by preserving the right Dharma is that we need to spread what is the word of the Buddha, what is pure, what is virtuous, and what is beautiful. And recently on my trip here to Singapore and Malaysia, a lot of devotees and venerables have been telling me that in this particular region, in Malaysia in particular, there's a lot of New Age Buddhists coming up who claim themselves to be true Buddhists, to claim themselves to have supernatural powers and to claim that people can reach enlightenment in this particular lifetime. So a lot of this faiths that we see coming up aren't necessarily the true Dharma. They could be erroneous or wrong. And so we need to make the vow that with our life we will try to preserve and continue on this lineage of what is true and what is pure. So he says, I am a son of the Buddha. I am not able to repay his kindness. There is no benefit to myself and others. When I am alive, I do not benefit beings. When I die, I do not benefit my descendants. Though the sky is high, it cannot cover me. Though the earth is thick, it cannot carry me. Among the most serious wrongdoers, am I not one? Okay, so remember who is speaking here? It's Master Xing An Shi. And remember in the beginning of this text, he is saying that he is an unworthy and common monk. And now he is saying that he is a serious wrongdoer. So someone who is such an eminent master, who is so well cultivated, is calling himself a serious wrongdoer. It's not to say that he is belittling himself, but he's reflecting about all of the things that have yet to be done that he still has not done. So if he says it like this, then what about us? We're not as well cultivated as him. So we should also be mindful that as a disciple of the Buddha, we are unable to repay the kindness of the Buddha. And so we don't really benefit ourselves or other people. So while we're alive, we're unable to spread the Dharma because we also have many obstacles or many other responsibilities in our life. And when we die, there's not much that we can leave to our children or descendants. So because of the kindness of the Buddha, our parents, our teachers, our benefactors, and sentient beings, how do we repay it? We cannot repay it. And so by knowing this, we can develop our gratitude and humility to give rise to the Bodhi mind. So he says, even with such intolerable pain, I do not have any good plan. So I ignore how deluded I am, and I instantly set the initiation of the great line. Even if we cannot halt the decline of the Dharma now, we can determinedly vow to protect the right Dharma for future lives. So Master Xing An says he does not have any good plan. Neither do we. There's no way that we can stop the decline of the Dharma now with our limited ability. But that doesn't stop us from making the vow. So it is like in the Jataka tales, in the former life of a Buddha, there was a parrot. And the forest was on fire. So seeing the forest on fire, the parrot took a little bit of water in his beak and went to try and put out the fire. And he kept going back and forth, taking a little bit of water and trying to put out the fire. The parrot was not able to do so, but because of his diligence, of his selflessness, the heavenly beings were so moved and touched that they also came in to help put out the fire. So likewise, we are like that parrot. There is no way for us to stop the decline of the Dharma with our limited ability, but that shouldn't stop us from making that aspiration. We're striving for Buddhahood. So it's impossible for us to reach Buddhahood in this lifetime, but doesn't mean that we stop trying. So this is the reason why Master Xing An writes this particular text, an inspiration to give rise to the Bodhi mind. And so he concludes, thus, I and some good friends come to the temple for repentance and establish this Dharma function. We make the 48 vows. Each vow is to liberate all sentient beings and hold with a profound mind of thousands of disciples once every year for this Dharma meeting. So this is the reason why he has come here, and he establishes the 48 vows. And the 48 vows, each one of them is a vow to liberate all sentient beings, and is the essence of the Bodhi mind. Okay? And he says, from now to an endless future, our goal is to be reborn in the Pure Land. Once we reach the 9 ranks of the Western Pure Land, then we will return to this world to liberate sentient beings. Let the Buddha's light shine again, and the gate of the Dharma will reopen. So he says that while we are very limited in our abilities now, if we go to the Pure Land, get these skills and the Dharma, then when we come back, we will have more ability to do so. So I hear that many people say, oh, there's no point in becoming reborn in the Pure Land because it means you have to come back to this earth again. So why not just stay here anyways? But Master Xing An Zixian is saying that, yes, it's just like continuing education. Maybe you're in your work. Do you need to go and get another master's degree or a PhD? Perhaps you do. Doesn't mean that you're going to stay in school forever. It's just that when you get that degree, when you get the school, you get the skills. When you come back into society once again, you have more knowledge, you have more skills, you have more power. It doesn't mean to escape. So when we go to the Pure Land, we're not planning to stay there forever. We're planning to get the necessary skills and to come back once again to liberate all sentient beings. So now, Master Xing An Zixian says, we have the direction and we have the method of cultivation. The direction is where we want to go, and the method of cultivation is how we are going to get there. So it's like using Google Maps. You enter your destination, and now you have to think, are you going to get there by MRT? Are you going to drive? Are you going to get Grab? Or are you going to walk there? So the address or the direction, the destination that we want to get to is we want to cease evil, false, small, and partial vows. And we want to try and develop what is right, what is true, what is great, and what is perfect. And how do we get there? It's not something that just instantly, it's not instant teleportation. You don't press a button and then all of a sudden you appear at your destination. You need to find a way to get yourself there. And that's through the 10 kinds of conditions. Now, on your way to get to your destination, you might face a lot of obstacles. For example, traffic jam, construction work, so you might need to take a detour. However, if we really want to get there, then no matter how long it takes, we will still get there eventually. So how do we do this in our daily life? How do we apply it to our daily practice? The first one is to cultivate gratitude. Gratitude for all of the causes and conditions that we have today. What should we be grateful for? The first one is that we are all born as a human being. We're all very healthy. We have our 6 sense organs. We're able to hear the Dharma. And also we're very grateful for our parents, our teachers, everyone who has supported us. We're very grateful that we have food. We have a roof over our heads. We're grateful that we live in such a good country. All of this. By doing this, we understand that we really need to put in effort in our cultivation to make sure that we do not waste everyone's kindness, that we make it meaningful. And the second aspect is to have the courage, determination, and perseverance, that no matter what kind of obstacle we meet, we will keep moving forward. And so it says, sincerely I pray to the Great Assembly,
please have compassion for my will. Let us all join hands and make the Bodhi mine. Those who have not yet done so, do so now. Those who have already done so, renew the vows again.
So that is why the text is called an inspiration to give rise to the Bodhi mind. Not just once, but thought after thought. So it's not enough just to say, oh, I have the Bodhi mind and leave it there, but we need to continuously protect, nurture it, and let it rise once again and again. And he tells us, do not fear. The first one is, do not retreat due to the fear of difficulties. Oftentimes we ascension beings, we think something is difficult, so we don't even try. He's saying, don't do that. Don't lack self-confidence. Be confident that I am a Buddha. Be confident that we have the Buddha nature within us. The second one is, on the other hand, do not slight vows as something easily done. So don't fall into either extreme. Do not be depressed. Do not lack self-confidence. Do not pity yourself. But on the other hand, do not be arrogant and think you can do it all. And do not rush and lose determination. Maybe all of a sudden you're filled with Dharma joy, so you make this grand vow, but you don't follow through. So what do we call that? The dragon head and a snake tail. So that's what he's saying. And do not be lazy and without courage. Do not be pessimistic and take no action. Do not be passive and wait idly for things to be done. Do not allow ignorance or lack of determination to stop you. And do not debase yourself or think you have no share because of shallow roots. So don't think just because you don't understand the Dharma now that you won't understand it forever. Eventually there will be a day. So don't say, oh, I cannot make a perfect Bodhi vow now, but eventually you will be able to. So there's a story about a woodcutter who took his axe to go and cut wood. And his boss told him, okay, try to go and cut as many trees as you can. So on the first day, he was able to cut 20 trees. And he felt very proud of himself. And he said, okay, the next day I'm going to go out and I'm going to cut 20 trees. So he went out, but he only came back with 17 trees. Then on the third day, he went out again, and he only came back with 10 trees. And on the next day, he went out and he only cut 5 trees. So he was very confused. He said, but on the first day, I cut 20 trees, and now I only have 5 trees. Is it my ability? But what he has not realized is that in the process of cutting his tree, his axe also became blunt. It needed sharpening as well. So likewise, in our practice, maybe the first time we have meditated joy. And so the next time we meditate, we want to try and get that experience again. Maybe you only get halfway. Then the next time you find that you have more afflictions. And then you start to wonder, is it because of my practice or is there something wrong with the Dharma? What he's trying to say is that our skills are like that axe. Our Dharma knowledge is like that axe. So we need to constantly sharpen it as well. So do not go in having expectations that you will cut 20 trees every single time. It's okay to be patient. And so that's why Venerable Master says, when it's time to rest, you should also rest. You should also find that time to recharge, to give yourself time to sharpen your blade. If you constantly give, you also need energy for yourself. So don't feel that you are being greedy by taking time to recharge. And so Master Xing'an Sixian also says that he uses 2 metaphors. Trees, when planted, have shallow roots, but eventually they grow to have deep roots and become large plants. Likewise, when we study the Dharma, we have shallow roots. But doesn't mean that we should get rid of the tree. Doesn't mean that we should feel depressed. With enough time, with enough care, then we can also become like this tree. And so, like a knife that may be not polished, as long as we take in the effort to sharpen it, blade by blade, then eventually it will become a sharp knife. So it's saying that do not just throw away the tree because it has shallow roots. Do not throw away the knife just because it's not sharp. With enough time and perseverance, you will get there. Okay? So lastly, he says, cultivation is hard for a while, but you will get tranquility forever. Being lazy is easy for a lifetime, but it will cause you suffering for many lifetimes. With the Pure Land as our very boat, why are we worried about regression? If we attain the patience of non-arising, why are we afraid of difficulties? You should know the wrongdoers in hell who had initiated the bodhi mind in previous lives. So he's saying that cultivation may seem difficult, but once you get the hang of it, it becomes easy. However, if we don't cultivate, we relax now, but it will still cause us suffering. And we shouldn't feel that it's too difficult because we can be reborn in the Pure Land. It gives us an option. So we don't need to fear that we won't be able to attain Buddhahood. Now, for the last sentence, it says, we should know that the wrongdoers in hell who had initiated the bodhi mind in previous lives. So, in the Buddha's previous life, he has also been reborn in hell. So, there is a story where the Buddha was a doctor and Devadatta was the sick patient. And so Devadatta came to the Buddha, who was the doctor, came to the doctor and said, I'm very sick, can you cure me? And so the doctor gave the patient a cure, the medicine. And the patient said, I do not have any money, but I promise I will pay you back next time. Then the next time, the same patient came back, Devadatta came back, and said, I'm very sick, and I know I promised to pay you, but I promise you I'll pay you next time. So the doctor again cured him and gave him the medicine. Then the third time, Devadatta came back again and said, oh, I promise you I will definitely pay you, just cure me this time. And so the doctor was very impatient and thinks that this person is just cheating him out of his money. So the doctor decided to put poison in the medicine. And so upon taking this poison, he died instantly. And so because of this, Shakyamuni was reborn in hell and suffered for many kalpas. And this is written in parts of the Agamas. So what is saying that even the Buddha had experienced rebirth in hell, but he never gave up his bodhi mind. So likewise, we may make many mistakes, we may be very angry, we may still experience hatred, but we can still continuously cultivate and still get ourselves out of hell and eventually reach Buddhahood. Okay? So he says, how could we, as humans and sons of the Buddha, not make a great vow in this life? It is in vain to regret our beginningless ignorance. It is not too late to be awakened and initiate the bodhi mind now. Do not say that a thought is trivial. Do not think that empty vow is totally in vain. A sincere mind can make things true, and a profound vow can lead to further action. The vastness of the sky is not great, but the mind is great. The diamond is not firm, but the power of God is the firmest. May all of you retain my words. Let the bodhi friends join together now, and let the Lotus Association be established. May all of us be reborn in the Pure Land and see
see Amitabha Buddha together, mutually liberate sentient beings, and attain enlightenment at the same time. Who is to say that the future 32 marks of excellence of the whole person with the adornment of 100 merits are not rooted in today's vow?
So he's saying that the future Buddha comes from today's vow. So you should act quickly and seize the day and live in the present moment. May it be encouraged. The future is bright and the possibilities are great. And so this is the end of an inspiration to give rise to the Bodhi mind. So he's saying that even with all of the suffering, with all of the obstacles, we still have a very bright future and the possibilities are great in our cultivation. And in this way, we can feel inspired and encouraged to move on with our cultivation. Okay, so this will conclude our talk, and I believe time is almost up. So if you have any questions, you can leave them for when we end and come up here to ask me if you have any questions. But before we break, let us dedicate merits. So please join your palms. May kindness, compassion, joy, and equanimity pervade all worlds. May we cherish and build affinities to benefit all beings. May charm, pure, and precepts inspire equality and patience. May our humility and gratitude give rise to great thoughts. Thank you very much. Thank you.